Hey guys, this is Chaos Chrono. I'm here back with another display from AOA. Hope you guys enjoyed the last video and the overall content for that. Since I haven't uploaded that one yet, while recording this one, I decided to make another video. So without further ado, let's get started and see what we have in today's display. Once again, same opening format, same order from pulling out of the display, and now I'll label them as I did the last video. Alright, now with everything labeled, we'll continue on with the introduction of each deck.
Alright, moving on to our first deck, we have Leadstall Vance, the Spooky and Tricky. Fun name. We have Logos, Mars, and Sanctum. Looking at Amber generation, we have 16 pips of Amber. Supporting cards include Cutthroat Research, Mars First for its effect, potentially Reaping, Healing Blast and its effect, and free markets as well for up to 5 Amber. Conservatively measured, we're looking at about 22 for Amber generation. Amber control, we have Cutthroat Research, 2 interdimensional graphs, Gromid and its fight ability, Aubade, Maruk, Take Hostages, and Doorstep 7. A few support cards include Shockworm and Stormcrawler to prevent the opponent from using their board. So overall, Amber control I'll rate as a 8. There is no artifact control in this deck. For creature control for direct removal, we have Tixel Beambuckler, Mothership Support, Orbital Bombardment, and One Stood Against Many. Some support cards include Dominator as a big fighter, Zorg, Bromid, Martian Hounds for increasing that power, and Lion Botrom, again increasing power, and a Shield of Justice to help with the One Stood Against Many and other fights that may need to take place, especially using Sanctum creatures. So that creature control I would rate at about a 6. Overall a little bit weaker, but there is plenty to go around. In terms of speed, we have 2 Expians, 2 Labworks, ZYX Researcher, a Research, and a Research Moko. So overall rating it about an 8. Highlights for this deck include the 2 interdimensional graphs. Having those are always good, especially when you face off against rush decks. The free markets, which can potentially hit for big Amber. One Stood Against Many with the Gromid combination, which essentially makes your Gromid lose 3 Amber, and you can potentially get your Gromid killed. That way you can start playing creatures again. So that's one way to kind of manage the Gromid situation, given that it's kind of a risk. So when looking at the areas that are bad for this deck, Gromid is one of them, since it does prevent you from being able to play anything onto your board. And if I was the opponent, I'd want to keep that thing alive. I'll ward it, I'll heal it, etc. So that is a bit of a risky play. The other thing is that this deck is missing a board wipe, and most of the creature control is actually limited within Mars itself. There is definitely some stuff to use in Sanctum, but for the most part, Mars will be your board removal. So looking at all these combos and the numbers, overall it's not too bad. But given the type and how it might come, plus the anti-synergy with some of these cards, I'm looking more at a 65. Pretty decent for an AOA deck, and pretty toolkitty, but there is no artifact control. Creature control can be pretty limited and somewhat situational for, like, for example, Mothership Support requires you to have a board of Mars creatures in order to use it. And orbital bombardment, there isn't anything that allows you to really capitalize on it. Things like key abduction or whatnot that are things that get you extra Mars cards in general. So yeah, overall rating for this deck is about a 65. So moving on to the second deck, we have Uniflux, the Whiz of the facility. We have Brobnar, Sanctum, and Untamed. Looking at Amber generation, we have 13 pips of Amber printed on the cards. Support cards include the Flex, Rustnar, Amberspine Mongrel, Flaxia, Soldiers of Flowers. So to conservatively estimate a total Amber generation, I'm looking at about 20. For Amber Control, primary cards include Grok, Take Hostages, Doorstep to Heaven, and Gatekeeper. Not too many cards, though some of them do have fairly large effects, so that plays to its benefit. Overall, I'm looking at about a 6, but probably a little bit lower than that. Artifact Control, the Rustnar fills that position, so again, 0.5, just because it needs to survive the fight in order for that effect to kick in. Looking at Creature Control, where we have direct removal in 1-2 Punch, Blinding Light, but that's more for stunning, so not really removal. And supporting cards include Bingo Bang Bang, Into the Fray, Lollip as a big fighter, Signal Fire, Lion Bottom for increased power, Gatekeeper as a fighter, Penpaka Enga to increase the power of your creatures, and increasing their survivability in the process. Overall, for creature control, the rating is going to be pretty low. I'm putting it about a 4. Looking at speed, cards that support this include 2 Sound the Horns, Glimmer, Gravit Cycle, and Nepenthe Seed. So the overall speed I'm rating about a 5. Highlights of this deck, we have a good solid type of Amber Control. Just lacking is the negative aspect of that. Flex with Lollip is always nice to see. That way there's potentially 5 Amber straight up from that combination. We have a good amount of recursion and Untamed between Glimmer, Nepenthe Seed, and Gravit Cycle. World Tree as well, though I'm not a big fan of that card just because it does potentially give your opponent information on what house you're going to want to use next. And given the disruptive type of cards that exist in this game, giving that information to your opponent can be pretty detrimental. Some of the other bad aspects of this deck, we're lacking creature control overall. And within the AOA sets, that's pretty bad. And when you think about facing against Worlds Collide or Mass Mutation, again, that's a very important number that you want higher. And it's relatively low rated in terms of the Amber Control as well. That's going to be working against its overall performance. Heart of the Forest without a key cheat essentially renders Heart of the Forest useless, because the only way that it benefits is if you're behind and you want to pull the other player back to prevent them from winning. You're going to need to get 2 keys on 1 turn, and without a key cheat you can't do that, so that it ends up making the Heart of the Forest useless. That 1 Amber Pip might not be worth it unless you try to destroy it yourself with the Rustnar. Hallow's Shield is an artifact that I really don't like. Its overall value is very limited, and in this case, yeah, like you don't have that many bodies in Sanctum. It's only useful for that 1 fight, so sure, take hostages for that 1 turn, but like if you had 1 stood against many, that would kind of make Hallow's Shield a bit better, but overall a pretty weak artifact. So we do have Protect the Weak, the Penpaka and Grove Keeper to kind of improve the survivability of that 1 Dusk Witch. And you can bring her back more or less every Untamed turn. The War Drummer in this deck is a nice legacy, but unfortunately it's pretty useless other than for like healing your bigger bottom creatures like your Lollip and your Grok. It's going to be useless for Bingo Bang Bang and Little Rapskull, unless you want to remove Little Rapskull from the field because it's actually hindering you rather than helping you. That's, I guess, an issue there. Unfortunately, we're just lacking like a key cheat, so overall rating for this deck, I'm going to say about a 62. It has potential for generation, so can't really deny that. But the low creature control does hinder it significantly against other sets and within its own set. Moving on to deck number 3, we have Breanna, Round Palace Governor. We have this, Logos, and Mars. And looking at Amber generation, we have 8 pips of Amber, which is relatively low. Supporting cards include Misery Exploit, 2 copies of Mars Needs Amber, Xanathix Harvester, and Brainstem Antenna combo. So those are extra ways to generate, so I'll conservatively rate it at about a 14 for Amber generation. Amber Control, we have the 2 copies of Anguish, to Mars needs amber. That is it. So amber control is very limited. Plus there is a Titan mechanic, so depending on the situation, that might help the opponent as well, since it's a two-way effect. So overall, amber control, I'm rating it at 5. Now the value of each of the anguishes and the Mars needs amber can vary, and at least in this deck there is that Tixel, so Tixel beam buckler to make sure that the Mars needs amber can actually hit for 1 at least. Mothership support can get you more, but that's situationally going to be usable. Artifact control, there is one Poltergeist. I believe that has a value of 1.5, but I personally just rate it as a 1, as a full removal. Creature control, for direct removal we have Hysteria to bounce creatures back. We have Carpet Flotsam, Tixel Beam Buckler, Hypno Beam, Mothership support. All those are good cards for that, and support cards include Pip Pip, Agent Human, and Stormcrawler to manage the opponent's board a little bit. Overall creature control looks to be rated about a 6. Moving on to speed, we got 2 Igors, a Helper Bot, Professor Sutterkin, Rocket Boots, and Brainstem Antenna. We also got some disruptive cards, including Binding Irons and 2 Streaks to help slow down the opponent. So overall speed, I'm going to rate about a 9. Some highlights, we got some taunts for key creatures, like Streak, Professor Sutterkin, yeah, primarily those 2. Then what we got is a fun combo with Rocket Boots and Brainstem Antenna, and putting them on either Sutterkin, Harvester, or Human. Sutterkin obviously to draw a lot, depending on how many Logos creatures are on the board at the time. And a Harvester for that Amber generation, and Human to stun the enemy's board. So there's a lot of fun things that you can do with that particular combination, but again, it kind of depends on having that Mars hand to build off of. So yeah, the bad things about this deck, we've got Amber Imp, which Amber Imp and Pip Pip, like, they've had their uses, but the gain is already there if the opponent thinks it's worthwhile. Otherwise, like a 2-power creature, we've got a lot of direct damage these days that can easily remove them. Master the Theory is a card that I just don't see value in. I mean, if there was a key abduction, maybe, but otherwise just archiving all those cards, and you have to have no creatures. Yeah, like, it lets you archive if you have no creatures on the board, and it's for every enemy creature that's on the board. So it doesn't really seem to have much value overall to help you get back. Like, it makes your turn kind of moot if you want to use that to archive your entire hand. So, like, unless it could archive their opponent's creatures, that would be nice. What else? We have Scientific Hack. That's kind of wasted because we don't have any other artifact to really combine that with. So, yep. I mean, Quantum, but like, it doesn't. There's really no value out of that. Carpet Flotsam has some limited application, as you're going to try to take on the board as much as possible. Carpet Flotsam is a card, is a pseudo wipe, mass damage that really doesn't work though. Like, I mean, if they have a big board, big creatures, that'll survive. It'll combo well with Misery Exploit, but again, they're still going to be behind. They're not going to have that board ready. So overall, not a setup I prefer. And the overall SAS that I'm rating this deck at is about a 59. Moving on to deck number 4, we have the Frothing Explorer. It's Mars, Shadows, and Untamed. For Amber generation, we're looking at 12 pips of Amber. We have supporting cards including Mars First, Mars Needs Amber, Mind Warper, 3 Nerve Blasts, a Ronnie, Sucker Punch that can recur, Mac the Knife, Darna, Rustnar, and Mimicry as potential Amber generators as well. So conservatively, I'm going to rate it at about a 22. Amber control, primarily we're looking at Mars Needs Amber, Nizic Resonator to increase the cost, the 3 Nerve Blasts, and Ronnie. Some supportive cards include Mimicry for potential for sealing as well, or Amber control, and Amber Conduction Unit to deter creatures from reaping, or if they reap then they can't creep every turn, as you'll stun them. So overall, Amber Control I'm rating at about an 8. For Artifact Control, we have Rustnar. So again, the 0.5 value, at least it's there. For Creature Control, Direct Removal, we have 2 copies of Carpet Flotsam. We have Exterminate, Life for a Life, 3 Nerve Blasts, Sucker Punch, Whistling Darts, Mac the Knife, they're everywhere, Kindred Longshot. So with these cards, like Exterminate in this deck is kind of weak since you don't have many powerful Mars creatures. The highest power is 4 in your Sky Booster Squadrons. So, and then Carpet Flotsam I discussed for the previous deck why it's not that great. Though with a bunch of small creatures on your side, you're going to be hard pressed to be holding the board. So you may actually get a chance to hit those off. Overall, Creature Control I'm rating at about a 9. For speed, we have Mars First, Dust Chronicles, and 2 Glimmer. There's also a few cards that disrupt the opponent as well, with Perplexing Sophistry, Amber Conduction Unit, and Heart of the Forest. Again, not so much on speed, but still some disruption. So overall with the speed, I'm giving 1 point for each card, so about 4 speed. Highlights, we got Heart of the Forest with a key cheat, so that's very nice. Glimmer with Mimicry allows you to reuse Mimicry over and over again, which is also pretty awesome. Okay, so the bad, we have limited Amber Generation in Untamed for that Heart of the Forest turn in order to get that key. There's only 3 pips including the Heart of the Forest itself, so that's probably not going to be one of the Amber pips you can get on that turn. So that's 2. You're going to rely heavily on that Darna play. There are no taunts in this deck either, so you can't protect that Dusk Witch, and I don't even think there's any power-ups either for this deck within Untamed. So survivability is going to be pretty low for these critical creatures, because they're hoping to cycle. There's 2 copies of Amber Conduction Unit, so that's redundant. It's not going to like double up that effect to the second creature. It's only the first creature, so this is a dead card for sure. One of them is for sure a dead card, the other is close to being a dead card, and there's no true board wipe. So like the Carpet Flotsams, if you had both in your hand and no creatures on the board, that's a possibility, but overall no real wipe. So for the stats for this deck, I'm rating it about a 62. Deck number 5, we have Lady Nebula Blogs. It's a Disc Logo Sanctum deck. For Amber Generation, we're looking at 14 pips. Pretty nice. Support cards including Dust Imp, Misery Exploit, 2 copies of Cutthroat Research, and Binate Rupture. Total Amber Generation, I'm estimating about a 20. Again, trying to be conservative. Moving on to Amber Control, we have The Lash of Broken Dreams, 2 copies of the Cutthroat Research, Obade, 2 copies of Maruk, and Take Hostages. All 3 houses have some sort of Amber Control, so that's pretty nice. And you have an Exhume and Disc that can kind of bring back Obade or what other tools you might want. Support cards include Amber Imp, Sir Meros, and Joya to decrease the opponent's generation essentially. So overall Amber Control, we're looking at about a 7. Artifact Control, once again, there is none. Big fat 0. Creature Control, we have Direct Removal in Unlock Gateway, Gunguzel, Soulkeeper, Standardized Testing, and to stun the board, Radiant Truth. Supporting cards include Shield of Justice and Hallowed Shield, just to make sure your board survives any fights, but that's going to be limited to the Sanctum turns when they fight, so pretty limited there. Overall Creature Control, I'm going to rate a 6. Speed, we have Exhume, Library of the Damned, 2 Labworks, a Director ZYX, and Jark Goggle to help improve our speed. And some disruptive cards to decrease our opponent's speed is Biting Irons and Tesmal. When implemented effectively, that can hurt real bad for the opponent. Highlights, overall there's nothing really special. I mean, I don't usually see certain duplicates like backup copy, but it's not really anything special per se. This deck just has a little bit of everything except for Artifact Control, and it's a little lacking on the creature control aspect as well. So not a bad deck by any means, but nothing that really stands out. Final stats for this deck, I'm estimating about a 62. Moving on to the next deck, we have the Great Guardian of Greenthwaite. Has houses Mars, Shadows, and Untamed. For Amber generation, we are looking at 10 pips. Support cards including Gamgee, 2 copies of Ronnie, Swindle, and Sucker Punch, totaling about 17 expected Amber for me for Amber generation. For Amber control, primarily we're looking at Gamgee, the 2 Ronnies, and Swindle, so pretty much just the Shadow set for Amber control. Support cards include 2 copies of Nature's Call to help you bring those Ronnies back, and Glimmer again, any of those cards, or Swindle perhaps even. So overall Amber control, I'm rating about a 5. For artifact control, it's 0.5, as we do have a Rustnar. For creature control, direct removal, we have 2 copies of Mother Gun, 3 copies of Tixel Beambuckler, Sucker Punch, Whistling Darts, they're everywhere, 2 copies of Nature's Call, and a Lupo. Supporting cards include Key Abduction, which really work like a Hysteria would, but for Mars, and Martian Hounds to increase power, and Collector Worm for some board control as well. So overall creature control is pretty good in this deck. I'm rating it about a 14. For speed, we're looking at 2 copies of Proliferator. I mean, limited to Mars cards, but still helps with efficiency. Dust Chronicles, Hidden Stash, and Glimmer all help out with the speed of this deck. Not particularly high in draw, but at least, you know, getting cards out, bringing cards back when you need them. So I'm bringing the speed up to about an 8. It's probably a little less than that in terms of actual, you know, draw and increased card output, but I'm still rating it as an 8. Highlights, this deck is like anti-board. You can nice combo here is Key Abduction with Beam Bucklers. So you play them down, you Key Abduction them back up, and you can play them down again. And you can roll a 6 if you have all 3 copies. Your Proliferators can let you reuse that Key Abduction as well. So the main 2 actions, Key Abductions and Martian Hounds, you can keep reusing them. Double Ronnie is always good to see, and the more Ronnies the better in the set really. Super good value in terms of getting Amber, especially for the high-end control. 2 copies of Highway Hall, not particularly useful, but interesting. The Double Nature's Call, unfortunately there's not much you can utilize that with. You can bounce back your Glimmer to bring back any Untamed card for that turn. So again, like kind of like the Key Abduction with the Beam Buckler, you can repeatedly use the Nature's Call. If your opponent only has creatures in their hand, Mass Mutation aside because of the enhancements, they're effectively going to be playing their creatures down, and you can just keep bouncing them over and over again, which is kind of nuts. Albeit like it's limited to 3 creatures, so, or 2 if you want Glimmer back to do this combo. Another good target would be Lupo, just to do the extra 2 damage whenever you play him. So yeah, there's a lot of good board control in this deck, which puts it in pretty good standing in terms of within the AOA set. I would actually rate this a 68 if it was just strictly against AOA. But with the lack of generation and the lack of good Amber control, it's going to be a little hard to compete with. So I would say overall, compared to like other sets and stuff, I might drop that down to about 64 overall. Moving on to deck number 7, we have Helioous, the Quack Companion. It has Brobnar, Mars, and Sanctum. For Amber generation, we're looking at 6 Amber pips. Support cards include Boozle, the Flex, Mind Warper, and Healing Blast. Totaling Amber generation about a 12, so pretty lacking in Amber generation. For Amber control, we have Broke, Burn the Stockpile, Shadowstorm, Board in the Redeemed, and Maruk the Marked. That brings the total about a 7. Overall, the Amber control is decent, covering all 3 houses at the very least, and there's some big plays like Shadowstorm, Burn the Stockpile that can make the opponent lose a lot of Amber, but otherwise not too much going on. Oh, and also Mind Warper for Amber control. For artifact control, we have 2 copies of Gorma Bomb, so that's nice. Unfortunately, they are artifacts themselves, so they do take a turn to become effective. And secondly is given Eden's Jar as a thing, Eden's Jar, however you want to pronounce it, having a single option is always going to be a little rough, as you may potentially face those decks. So overall, artifact control of 2. Creature control, we have direct removal in the form of Bramo, the 2 scrappers. We have Tremendous on the board, Mother Gun, Hypno Beam, take control of the opponent's creature, and Spirit's Way to wipe the board of any creature that's larger than 3, or equal to / larger than 3. Support cards include Collector Worm, all the Brobnar fighters, Mind Worm, Hallowed Shield, and Shield of Justice. So overall creature control is pretty decent, looking at about an 8. For speed, we are looking at just the 2 proliferators to help with that, and Invasion Portal as well. All those to help cycle your deck. There's an argument that can be made for Epic Quest, but there's only 1 knight, so that's kind of awkward. So overall speed, I'm gonna look at about a 3. For highlights, we have Might Makes Right, which is a nice key sheet for Brobnar. We have a decent number of large creatures. Again, it's all in Brobnar and maybe Maruk and Sanctum. Other than that, it's pretty lacking. The Epic Quest, unfortunately, is not going to hit with just 1 Night creature. That requires you to have the Epic Quest down when Maruk is on the board, archive him, and then hope you draw 6 cards that are Sanctum to complete the Epic Quest. So overall, for SAS, I'm looking at about a 60. Moving on to deck number 8, we have Programmer Oyama, Brobnar, Logos, and Sanctum deck. For Ember Generation, we're looking at 8 pips. And support cards include the 2 Cutthroat Research. So overall Amber Generation is pretty low at about a 10. For Amber Control, we have Pile of Skulls, Dimension Door, 2 copies of Cutthroat Research, Board in the Redeemed, and Gatekeeper. Supporting cards include Sir Meros. Overall, having a bit of Amber Control in each house is nice to see. That way it'll be handy, but because of the limited amount of Amber Control, I'm gonna have to rate it pretty low at about a 6. Artifact control, there is none, so looking at 0 for that. For creature control, this is actually pretty one of the strong suits of this deck. We have Bramo, Coward Zen, Pound, Tremor, Flamewake Shaman, and 2 copies of Smite. Supporting cards include Into the Fray, Relentless Assault, Hallowed Shield, and Hedrith's Wall. So having Hedrith's Wall is pretty nice, buffing the flank creatures, and we have all these Brobnar cards that are fully geared towards fighting, and Pile of Skulls to use all that fighting as Amber Control. So that's going to be pretty effective, though a single wipe that's well timed may give this deck a pretty hard time. Overall creature control, I'm rating about a 10. For speed, we have Hexbion, Professor Sutterkin, DOX Researcher, Philo the Researcher, Memory Trip, Time Traveler, and the Brobnar Ambassador. The negative values come from Coward's End, where you would get 3 chains. So with the logo set, obviously that speeds up the deck quite a bit. Overall, I'm a little mixed on the Time Traveler. Like, yeah, you get the draws potentially twice if Help of Yourself come, but at the same time, you shuffle your deck into your draw, or your deck and your discard pile together, effectively resetting your deck. So if you need certain cards and you hadn't drawn them yet, playing this would then potentially make it harder for you to draw what you need. The overall speed, I'm rating about an 8. I don't think with the style of rating I'm doing, I'm ever going to hit the 20s like some of these decks I see on the website. For highlights, we have Redacted, which is always a nice key sheet to have, especially if you are going to have frequent play with your Logos house. With Dimension Door, that would be ideal in terms of reaping with your creatures, but in general, and Professor Sutterkin to draw extra cards. But overall, it's not going to be that common that Logos is your main, especially with all these small creatures and limited number of creatures. We have Pile of Skulls with plenty of fights, so yeah, the Brobnar set is pretty solid for what it's trying to do. It's trying to do board control with Amber control, and that's exactly how this is supposed to be, but it relies very heavily on Pile of Skulls, so if you don't get that early on in game, that might hurt you in the long run. So you might be mulliganing for that Pile of Skulls. And assuming your opponent doesn't have good artifact control, or like the removal type control of artifacts. The bad, we have low Amber Generation at only 10, which is my estimation. It's going to be a reap focus board, which ideally would have more reap effects, but we're not seeing much of that. So unfortunately, it's very limited in Amber Generation. It's going to be slow. The control isn't there to keep up. So I think there's a lot of potential for this deck, but it's very niche and situational. Under the right circumstances, it'll definitely perform over what I think it is right now. But I'm gonna rate it about a 58. Probably like may seem a bit on the higher end given the numbers, but the solid board control, especially within an AOA meta, this might be good enough to pull out the win. Moving on to deck number 9, we have the Doctor of Lochfield. It's a Broadnar Logos Untamed deck. For Amber Generation, we have 10 pips, and support cards include 2 copies of Binate Rupture, Interdimensional Graft, and Darna. So that brick combo is going to come in really importantly for this deck. In Amber Generation, I'm estimating about a 15. For Amber Control, primary cards are Groka and Interdimensional Graft. That's it. So really there is no control in the Amber Control in this deck, but I'll rate it as a 2. Artifact Control, we do have Grasping Vines, which delays the artifact effect, and temporarily removes it from the field. So against certain artifacts, are nice enough, but against others, if it just comes straight back, then it doesn't change anything. It's just slight delay or forcing the opponent into that house to play the artifact again in certain situations. So overall, artifact control is 0.5, maybe even lower, because Grasping Vines isn't a great control. Creature control is where this shines. We have direct removal in the form of 2 copies of 1-2 Punch, Bramo, Tremor to Stun, which works very well with the 1-2 Punch. Unlock Gateway, 2 copies of Bouncing Death Cork, they're everywhere. Perilous Wilds, and Inca to stun, as well as I believe Poison, which can help kill a few things if you can get some damage on it. However, there is no skirmish on Inca, so he would die just giving one thing a bite. Support cards include Bing Bong Bang Bang, Gang of Chieftain, Grove Keeper, 3 copies of Panpaka Anga, all to like increase the power of your board and to do some massive damage. So 3 copies of Panpaka Anga, that's kind of ridiculous, because imagine they're all on the left, every creature gets +6. That is pretty disgusting for power. We would love to have seen a Might Makes right here instead of that Unlock Gateway. That would absolutely make this better. Overall creature control, I'm looking at 12 based off those cards. For speed, we have the Library of Babel, Titan Librarian, and 2 Sloppy Lapworks. A little bit of disruption in 2 copies of Fogbank. But overall speed, I'm going to rate about a 5. Again, it's mostly just 1 card, 1 value, sometimes a bit more if they can do more, like Sloppy Lab Work lets you cycle a bit faster, but at the cost of discarding something potentially important, right? The highlights of this deck include the Brig combo. 2 Binate Ruptures is not the way to go for me. I'd much rather have the 2 copies of Interdimensional Graft and 1 Binate Rupture. That would be ideal. Creature control is one of the best parts of this deck. Having a big beefy board, let's imagine big beefy logos, big beefy Untamed, like, yeah, it's gonna be pretty sweet with that. And with that house setup with the bigger board, Darna is more likely to hit for some heals and Amber Generation, so that's pretty nice. Unfortunately, there is no key cheat, and that goes along with relatively low Amber Control or like non-existent Amber Control and low Amber Generation. The most interesting part about this deck is having 3 Panpaka Angas. Like, come on. Would it have killed you to give me the Jagger 2, given I have 3 Angas? But anywho, overall rating for this deck is going to be pretty low. Like, the board control is nice. The generation is pretty darn low. And the Bouncing Death Cork is going to hurt. Like, there's a lot of anti-synergy involved. So I'm looking at about a 55. Yeah, the Amber Control is just too low. And the speed's not necessarily there to get you to where you need to be to generate, because there's not much generation in this deck either. Moving on, we have deck number 10, Rolf Civil Keep Athlete. It's a Broadnar Shadows and Tame deck. For Amber Generation, we have 13 pips of Amber. Support cards include Blood Money, Throwing Stars, Umbra, Redlock, The Sting, Darna, and Amber Spine Mongrel, giving me about an estimate of 20 for Amber Generation. For Amber Control, again, this is very lacking. We only have the Grunt Buggy and Umbra. Now, with the Grunt Buggy, we do have all these giant creatures, 3 Groggins, Lollip the Titanic. We have Nox that can go up to that size. We have 10 Tadlin. So actually, it is an average number of creatures that work with this. So yeah, overall it's going to be like just key cost control, really nothing to steal, take away your opponent's amber. You're going to have to rely on the sting to help you generate, and there is no key cheat as far as I see to help you catch up. Yeah, so overall this deck is going to be pretty bad. Like the amber generation is there, so you'll be racing them on amber. The front buggy, but for amber generation it's only 2. Artifact control, we have Grasping Vines once again, so about a 0.5, not much to consider. Creature control, there's quite a bit. We have First Blood, Pound, Flamethrower, 2 Life for Lives, Throwing Stars, 2 Whistling Darts, Bone Rot Venom, Oubliette, they're everywhere, and Kindred Longshot. So there's quite a bit of removal in Shadows, but downside means what you saw earlier, there's no amber control. Support cards include the 3 Groggins, Lollip, and Grumpus for the fighting. Like creature control is pretty solid at 12. Speed, we have Dust Chronicles and 2 copies of Dust Switch and Regrowth. So overall speed I'll rate it as 4, 1 for each card, but it's probably a little lower than that. In terms of highlights, the good, we have Sting and Grasping Vines. So there's a way to get rid of the Sting and replay it again afterwards by using Grasping Vines. However, there's no delay for your opponent's forging, so since the Sting relies on you generating off your opponent, the play here is going to be try to get to the first key before your opponent, which with your generation is possible, but again, it's a situation generation, it's not purely based off pips, so overall this deck is gonna struggle. Still, with the amount of amber it can generate, it's probably still going to be in the 50s, not too low, but yeah, overall I don't see this deck being able to pull off a win without a key cheat. The reliance on Grunt Buggy without that many large creatures, and it's a double-sided effect, so your opponent could have larger creatures than you, in which case you might not even be able to use the Grunt Buggy. 3 Groggins is interesting, but you're going to have to keep fighting the flanks. In that awkward situation where you have a taunt creature next to flank creature, then good luck with that. So overall for the SAS for this deck, I'm looking at about a 55. Moving on to the second last deck in this display, we have deck number 11, the evidently twofold Sage of Tillytopia. We have Dis, Logos, and Sanctum. For amber generation, we have 13 pips. Support cards include Misery Exploit, Artanu's Bindings for Recursion, Healing Blast, and Prince Derek. So overall, I'm expecting about 18 amber overall per playthrough of the deck. Amber control once again is incredibly low. We're looking at Charette and Lash of Broken Dreams only. Support cards are Pip Pip and Barrister Joya, but really the only control is in Dis, and only 2 cards at that. So again, the amber control I'll rate about at 2, so that's very limited. Artifact control, there is none once again. Creature control, we have direct removal with Call of the Week, Unlock Gateway, 3 Fates, or Tanu with his bindings, Poke, Blinding Light, Smite, Radiant Truth, and Mighty Lens. Supporting cards include Golden Aura to make our creature invulnerable when it fights. So that's pretty nice. So I'll read the creature control at 10. For speed, we have 2 copies of Labyrinth, Poke, Sutterkin, Wild Wormhole, CYX Researcher, Brain Eater, and Jar Goggle. Another card that disrupts the opponent is Joya. So overall speed, I'm going to rate about an 8. Some highlights for this deck, we have good creature control, spanning all 3 houses, which is great. I mean, Poke still counts, but yeah, I know it's limited. We have no amber control, so that's bad. And we have a fun thing called Artanu. So that more or less sums up this deck. But overall, yeah, the performance is again going to be relatively low. The speed is nice, but the generation is average and the control is very lackluster. So with that in mind, I'm going to rate this deck at a 53. Last but not least, we have Gregg of Floodfell Mausoleum. It's a Broadnar, Dis, and Shadows deck. For amber generation, we're looking at 11 pips. Support cards include Foozle, Smith, Dust Imp, Gamgee, 2 Nerve Blasts, and Little Nif. So overall, I'm going to rate the amber generation at about 18 expected amber. For amber control, we have Burn the Stockpile, Flash Broken Dreams, Gamgee, the 2 Nerve Blasts, and once again Little Nif. Or Little Nif is probably more of a support card. So overall, I'm going to rate the amber control at 6. Artifact control, once again, we have nothing. I mean, Merkins, you can potentially hit something on your opponent's deck / archives, but don't count on it, right? Creature control, we have direct removal in 1/2 punch, 2 copies of Coward Zen, Flamewake Shaman, Unlock Gateway, 3 Fates, 2 Nerve Blasts, Whistling Darts, and Oubliette. Supporting cards include 2 copies of Bingo Bang Bang, 2 Old Yerks for fighting, and a Rushing Guntis to lock your opponent out of their house. For speed, we have the 2 Old Yerks that help you discard your hand pretty much to draw a new one, along with Dust Chronicles, Hidden Stash, and Library of the Damned. Unfortunately, we do have 2 Coward Zens, so if we assume we're going to be playing them, then that's 6 chains in total we're going to have to deal with for each playthrough. So overall, for the speed, I'm rating it about a 4. Again, not the best quality of cycling because it doesn't help you get cards out that much. The library is great. Archiving stuff is great. Dust Chronicles for draws, great. But the Old Yerks, I don't really like counting as much because you lose quite a bit of value if you're throwing out that many cards. And if you have both in your hand at the same time, then it gets awkward to play because you're chucking one of them. For highlights, we have good Amber Generation, or at least average, and good creature control. And those are important things in this set. There's just sufficient amounts of Amber control. So within the set itself, it's okay. It will do decently well, but outside the set, again, it's going to be outclassed. With the 2 Exhumes that's in this deck, it'll be useful to bring back Rushing Guntis every single time. There is a dead card in terms of effect, and that's Selwyn the Fence, because we don't capture anything. So unless Merkins gets us something like that, we're not going to get anything from Selwyn the Fence, except for Reaping. So overall for this deck, I'm going to rate it at a 65. It's decent, but yeah, there's a little ups and downs with the rating of these decks this round. But yeah, we'll see in a moment if I got these values correctly or if I'm way off. And yeah, hopefully I'll be able to get some playtesting done on some of these decks just to do a comparison, just to see if, do I trust my own judgment over a established rubric or just blindly trust that. Overall, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, but yeah, it's cool to see like where those differences come from. So with that, we covered all the different decks of this display. And again, we have a relatively low scoring average, at least from my estimations. I will, as usual, include all that information, all the images at the end of the video. I was really hoping to find, that stellar deck, diamond in the rough kind of thing. There are a couple of decent decks in here. Overall, I'd say any decent deck has a chance of winning, but the odds just gradually shift depending on the overall strength of the deck and performance, consistency, and all that. As usual, I always suggest that the main thing to do is playtest. Make sure you try out the deck before you decide to get rid of it, as there's a lot of things you don't notice until you play with it. So with that, I want to thank you all for dropping by and watching. It's been great to be able to provide this kind of content for you guys, and all the feedback has been nothing but positive, so thank you guys. If you did like the content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel for continuing Keyforge content that I'll release on a weekly basis. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please leave them in the comment section below. And as always, be kind and happy forging.